Judy! Get off my son! Judy, get off! Get away from my grandbaby! Get away from my grandbaby! Look what you're doing to my grandbaby!
I got you. Yeah, I will defend my brothers. I will defend the weak. I will pursue and fight evil so others may sleep. I am the sheepdog, protecting the night. Wolf hunters unite. Bring it on. It's time to fight.
What's up, guys? Mike the Cop. And before we get into today's video, just remember that you can become a citizen of Sheepdog Nation today. It's available in the App Store or Google Play Store. If you are a law enforcement, military, first responder, or someone who supports them, if you enjoy the freedom of firearms and common sense when it comes to cultural issues, you will have a home on the app Sheepdog Nation. Be sure to look for the Pig Pen, my group, on the app. In over a decade of being involved in law enforcement, I have learned one thing that is for sure, and that is just because it's on the news, just because it's a video clip, just because it's out there, doesn't mean you have the whole story. A glaring and recent example of this comes out of Columbus, where Officer Anthony Johnson, who is best known on Instagram as Oh No, It's Da Popo, and has this moniker of the dancing cop, has been all over the internet, only this time not for dancing, but for a right hook, literally to the face of a man that he encountered at a call. But if you just watch the viral video, if you just watch what the news showed you, this is all you would see.
Over there! Judy! Get off my son! Judy, get off!
No real context given to you, no real information provided, but the damage is already done. If Officer Johnson is not in the wrong, that will just get corrected or pushed to the end of some story later. But the damage is done on the internet. For those of you interested in truth and objectivity, welcome to the video. Let me give you a brief rundown of what actually happened, and then we'll compare some footage and notes between the reality and the news story. The situation in question in Columbus starts with the fact that they were dispatched to a shots fired call. Now, they have this technology in Columbus called Shot Spotter. Basically, what happens is anytime a gun is fired in city limits, these microphones strategically placed all over the city will triangulate the exact location of the origin of that gunshot. And there's a proper response protocol for that. Now, Officer Johnson happened to be the third officer that responded, the third car that responded to this call. The reason he continued to respond to it was because the original officers that arrived had someone grab something unknown off of a porch at the location where the shots had been fired from. This technology gives a pin on a map exactly where they need to go. And on this porch, someone took off, disregarded the commands of the police officer, lawful, and run into the house with an object. So he calls for other cars to show up because they're trying to figure out what's going on here. There's kids, there's people in the community. So now we have to see, is there an actual threat going on here? What's happening? Is someone shot? Has someone been injured? How do we protect people in this community from someone that may be a threat right now? So when people wonder, why are the cops showing up and why do they have firearms slung? Why do they look like they're ready for action or whatever? It's because they are ready for action. It's a protocol to respond to people who have been shooting a gun. Now, if you only had the viral video of Officer Johnson ultimately punching this man in the video, you're going to see a video. I want you to notice that when the punch happens, when this whole situation happens, what do you not see in the video? The entire right side of the body. You don't see the entire situation. So you can't judge the entire situation because you don't see the entire situation. Fortunately, we have all of the angles involved. And I want you to notice something right on the surface of this that the news does not show you because it wasn't important enough. Now, the news did say we're waiting for body-worn camera. It's supposed to be released on Monday when they broke the story over the weekend. We're waiting for body-worn camera footage. Okay, so then why are you running the story and expressing outrage and tapping into that? Well, we all know, because views matter more than objectivity. So moving on from that, the reality is now we do have the body-worn camera footage and we can show you the different angles. Now take a look at what was going on.
Hey! Get back! Or what? Get back! Or what? Get back! Or what? Get back!
And now let's take a look at it from Officer Johnson's body-worn camera, that angle.
Oh. Hey, back up. Don't do that. Get on the ground. On the ground.
I want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, this subject in question who was punched, he was squared up. Okay, he was in a squared up position against the first officer. And when the officer is giving him these lawful commands, he's saying, or what? It's a very threatening tone, a very threatening posture. Notice that Officer Johnson's tone is verbal de-escalation. Listen to his tone if you go back and hear it. And he's saying, hey man, don't do that. He's trying to de-escalate the situation. Now, when he goes to move that subject out of the way, that subject swats at his arm. And I want you to notice when you look back at this video, in a moment, he squares up with Officer Johnson and watch his right hand begin to drop down in a fist. Officer Johnson then responds with appropriate force. There's a theory in police use of force called the +1 theory. You don't wait for someone to punch you. If it's happening, you take action. This is common sense, and this is applied also to people in normal self-defense situations as well, legally speaking. Now, the news then feeds into this frenzy and talks about how the community is worried about excessive force. But what happens if we flip that over? Why not interview the police department and what if the police department was the one expressing outrage and concern over violence in communities? Would that play as well? The police department is in an uproar, in a frenzy over the violence that they're experiencing in their communities. People firing guns, people yelling at officers, people squaring up to them, people fighting each other in the communities. But that doesn't sound as good. The subject who was punched in the news story says he's glad to be alive, even though no one ever used a weapon on him. But he says in there that their hands were on the trigger, like as if they were ready to shoot him at any time, almost as if they were hoping to shoot him. But again, this doesn't fit the narrative. Here we have an African American officer dealing with an African American subject on the street. So that part of the narrative gets left out because, well, that doesn't fit. The news story goes on, and we'll play a little clip here for you about how this was all just about getting kids and protecting kids, and that they had permission from the officers.
I'm glad to be alive. It didn't need to happen in the way it happened. The officer, with his hand on his trigger, approaches her and is trying to, tell her what to do. Like, they knew they was coming to get the kids out the house. They knew that.
But how come none of this squares up with the conversation Officer Johnson has with this subject in his patrol car?
But we responded to somebody popping off rounds, so of course I'm gonna have a pump, you know what I mean? And he gonna have a gun in his hand. And when somebody run up on you with a gun in your hand, like, that's a whole different game, you know what I mean? Like, my gun already out. All it would take is you for you to grab it, you know what I mean?
I understand that. Yes,
look, I ain't got no hard feelings towards you, man. I honestly don't. Like, I don't feel no type of way about it. I wish we could go back in time and have this conversation before any of it happened. But unfortunately, we can't, man.
I don't hold no grudges, man. You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate it, man. But just future reference, man. Like, I know it's hard, man. I know stuff like that happen like this, man. Trust me, like stuff like when it's going down, man. Stuff like, and that's your wife and them is your kids, man. I ain't got no kids, but I can't imagine. I know what I do for my wife. But just at least grab her, you know what I mean? Wrap her up, be like, hey, come on, like, nah, we don't trust them or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Because when you put yourself in this situation, man, like this is unfortunately this is what has to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we have a use of force. What's that gonna look like if I steal on you and then you don't go to jail? You know what I mean? They're gonna be like, oh, they didn't even have nothing. You know how that.
Couple of things to notice about that. One is the subject has a very apologetic relaxed, calm tone. He says there's no hard feelings. He understands why the officer had to do what he did. Officer Johnson even asked him, why would you square up to an officer like that? Why would you square up like that? The man accepts the responsibility for his actions right to the officer, right on camera. But on the news cameras, it's a little bit of a different story. The other thing to notice is that he doesn't say that he knew what his wife was doing. He says he doesn't know why she was doing that. I don't know why she was doing that. I gotta talk to her.
And I'm sitting here trying to figure out the conversation I'm gonna have with her, because I don't know what she was doing. That's all I'm thinking about. Like, why did she
why you walking up to all these cops with their guns? Like, why you know what I mean?
With the children, too. Like,
Yeah,
you
man.
just, like, they gonna,
With
like,
both the babies.
both of them, like, they gonna see the babies, like, oh, let her through, let her through.
Yeah.
The reason is that no permission was ever given for anyone to cross the street. You'll even see, if you go back and pay attention to some of this footage, is that there was a kid knocked down on the ground by some of the adults there, and not even attempted to pick them up. They didn't care about the kids. They cared about their cell phone footage and yelling and acting the fool. I could rant about this from a lot of different angles, and you're probably picking up on my frustration, and rightfully so. I am frustrated. I'm frustrated because everybody wants to praise Officer Johnson when he's dancing and say, we need more cops like that. What do you mean? We need cops that dance but don't do cop work? Do you see the nonsense there? And the reality is that most cops, even though I can't dance, but just because the officers aren't dancing doesn't mean they're not having positive, good, regular interactions with people in their community. People live in this weird world on social media and mainstream media where they act as if just because they don't see it, it doesn't happen. Just because they don't see officers doing good things on video, it must not ever happen. But yet they also take the inverse of that and make the exception the rule. If they do see an officer doing something they perceive as negative, that must be happening all the time. And so they live in this literal contradiction all the time as they take in information from mainstream and social media. But being a good cop means that you're ready to actually do the work of a cop. And you know what they have to do sometimes? Go to places where guns have been fired and try to sort out the situation while keeping everybody as safe as possible. And lastly, a message to the news channels in Columbus, a message to the news channels all over that are just like those news channels in Columbus. Listen, I get it. You need views. You need high ratings. You gotta use clickbaity stuff. If it bleeds, it leads. You gotta go that direction. Okay, fine. Let's just say we'll give you that. But the problem is you don't make as big of a deal when that body-worn camera comes out. That's no longer the lead story. It's not the big deal. You take advantage of the situation for yourselves when it works in your favor. You do not do that when it takes away from the narrative that drives those views and ratings. And this is a plea for objectivity. It is a plea for a rational approach to sharing news, because these stories influence the minds and perceptions of people. And I'm not saying don't call out bad cops. Lead with that story, that's great. But lead with a story about a bad cop that you actually have the full evidence on, the full story on. You take someone like Officer Johnson, who has been on your channel doing positive things in your mind, and then you just let that fly out the window in order to get a story. And you're not willing to wait a couple of days to get all of the information to provide an objective, reasonable story, no matter where it leads, if it was good for him or if it was bad for him. And shame on you for being that way. Why not wait till all the information is out? The damage is already done. And so I hope that you guys will share this video up in the hopes that we can start showing people, we can push back and say, no, this isn't good journalism when you take someone and you smear them and you take the words of other people who are giving one angle without looking at all the other angles. The UPP, this is the end of the video. He's behind the camera. It's early in the morning. I don't know how this video is going to turn out, but dang it, I'm fired up now. Time to go. Okay, good day.
You sound like you were choking on something.
Yeah, bye.